So I'm going to walk you through my process for making a loaf of sourdough bread. And I've never done a video like this before where I have to do a bunch of different videos stitched together. So forgive me if this is just a bit awkward. So here is my starter. This is a 1.5 pint jar that I'm using. And as you can see, this is the level that it started out at. And it bubbled up to about here. And you can see there's like lines all on the side here, and it bubbled all the way up here, and then it's since collapsed. And now that it's back down to this level, it's quite ready to be fed. So that's what we're going to start with. I've got my fresh new jar here, and it's on a scale that's going to do grams, and it's all zeroed out. So I'm going to start off with some room temperature water, and I'm going to put in about 100 grams. And if you don't have a scale, that's okay, because it's roughly about 1/4 cup. I'm not too fussed about how accurate it is. People have been making bread for thousands of years, so I don't think that it needs to be exactly perfect. So that was 1/4 cup of water, and I use a blend of a whole grain flour or a whole wheat flour and just regular all-purpose flour. I found that the plain just all-purpose flour was a little boring tasting, and it didn't really have good yeast activity. So I do about 40% white flour and 60% of the whole grain flour. And so that's equal parts water and flour. So it's roughly 1/4 cup of water and 1/4 cup of flour. And so I wasn't super accurate on my water, but that's okay. Now I'm going to take, this is Cecilia, by the way. She was born on January 26th, and she's been going strong since. And I need to get a fork. I'll just give it a quick stir and make sure that whatever's on the bottom gets mixed up to the top. And hopefully I can do this one-handed. We'll see. I'm going to be adding about 50 grams of Cecilia to my new starter. And again, like, the yeast will continue to grow no matter what goes on. Like, you can add, I suspect in the summertime that I'll have to do smaller amounts in my starter because the heat will cause it to seriously bump up production. Like, this was clearly a little less than 50 grams. But again, it's about 1/4 cup of starter. So you just stir that up. It's going to be a little hard to do one-handed. Forgive me. It's going to look like really thin bread dough or really thick pancake batter, as you can see. Mostly all you're after is to make sure the starter gets well mixed in with that, and that the clumps of flour are mostly dissipated. That's good enough. I just scrape down the sides a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect again. And I make sure to loosely cover it. That's Cecilia. And when I have 2 hands available, I will move the rubber band from the old jar over onto here, and we'll call Cecilia dressed and ready for her new day. In the meantime, we will start on today's loaf, or no, rather tomorrow's loaf of bread. So my bowl, sorry, it's a little dirty. It's just dried leftover starter from the last bread, so it doesn't really matter too much about what is in the bowl. I'm pretty unconcerned about my yeast situation here. So I'm going to start with my whole wheat flour. I do, for my recipe, 275 grams of this, which is roughly, I think, about 2 cups, 2.5 cups perhaps, of flour. Well, whatever, 300 grams. I usually do 275, and I'll take some out just to be more consistent. It doesn't matter. What you're basically going after is 400 total grams of flour here. 400 grams of flour is roughly about 4 cups. Let's see. There we go. That's fine enough. And then 1 cup of water. Pardon me while I am not prepared at all. Dirty dishes in the sink. It's funny how little time you have to do that during the day when you've got kids. Okay. Back over here. I know I really do need to do something about my hand situation, because this is going to be hard to do one-handed. And I don't know if you can tell very well, but I'm not really caring too much about if it's close enough, it's good enough sort of thing. Because throughout the process of making this, you add a little more water, a little more flour here and there. And I'm honestly not that miffed about amounts. I'm not that kind of a baker. I've seen some pretty technical versions out there of people, saying temperature matters and the amount down to the individual grams matter. And my philosophy is people have been doing this for thousands of years without kitchen scales. So I don't think that it really matters that very much. What just basically matters is the technique. So this is really hard to do one-handed. I'm just gonna get my hands in there and mess it. Yeah, get on. There we go. So this is only flour and water right now. I haven't added any of my starter. It's still in my jar hanging out in there. But what I'm just doing now is making sure, again, like the starter, I'm making sure that there's no big clumps of flour in the bottom of it. I'm just kind of squishing things together. I'm not really kneading. I'm just making sure that as much of the flour is mixed in as I can reasonably do with one hand. I'm pretty close to saying, screw it, this is good enough. But you'll see why this doesn't really matter too much about the kneading, because I'm going to just let this sit for a minute, and it's going to do its own thing. It's going to go through a process. I don't know how to say it, but it's a process called autolyze. And what that's doing is it's just the flour is hydrating by itself, and while it's doing that, it is creating gluten, which is what gives bread that chewy texture. So I'm just going to let this sit for about 10 minutes or so, maybe 30 minutes. You can really let this sit as long as you want. I've done it where it sits in the fridge overnight and it's really good the next day. I've done it where I've mixed everything together right now. It's really, like I said, it's up to you. But as you can see, it's pretty tough right now. It holds its shape. I'm trying to stretch it out, and it's not really doing a whole lot of anything. But you'll see in about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, this is going to change pretty drastically, and it's going to make my job a lot easier. So hopefully I'll get that next video glued together with this.